welcome to the debate. For all of human history, a tool was just, well, something you picked up and then eventually put down.
Right, like a stone hand axe or, I don't know, a smartphone.
Exactly. The tool is out there in the physical world, and you are in here. It's a clean line. The demarcation between biology and artifact is absolute.
Even if you are totally addicted to your phone, you still have to physically look away at some point. The boundary is maintained.
Right. But what happens when the tool isn't something you hold, but something you actually are?
Yeah, that changes everything.
It really does. When we look at the rapidly advancing field of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, that physical boundary just evaporates entirely. We are looking at a technological landscape where we are directly wiring our neural circuits into machines.
And that forces a very uncomfortable question onto the table today. We are exploring the profoundly disruptive intersection of these interfaces and the philosophy of transhumanism.
Exactly. The core question is, does the technological enhancement of the human condition represent a necessary ethical imperative to solve our greatest biological limitations? That is the side I will be arguing.
Right, and I will be taking the bioconservative perspective, arguing that this represents a dangerous path, one that threatens to destroy our fundamental humanity, our sense of meaning, and, frankly, our social equity.
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the reality of the technology today. Because, this isn't science fiction anymore. From the transhumanist perspective, the underlying doctrine is straightforward but incredibly profound.
Which is what, exactly?
That we have a moral obligation to use applied reason to transcend the limits biology placed upon us. There is a perfectionist ethical imperative to eradicate suffering, and the clinical successes of BCIs over the last few years serves as the ultimate proof of concept here.
Okay, but wait. The clinical successes are undeniably miraculous. Restoring speech and movement to paralyzed individuals is a noble medical achievement. I completely agree with that, but there is a massive leap from medical therapy to directed evolution.
But look at how the mechanisms actually work. Because the technology itself doesn't care about that distinction.
How so?
Take the clinical trials out of UCSF recently. They worked with a patient who had been completely anarthric, so unable to speak, for over 15 years. They placed a high-density array of electrodes right over the part of his brain that controls the vocal tract.
Right.
For a decade and a half, his brain had been sending the neurological command to speak, but the biological hardware, his muscles, were broken.
So the implant essentially acts as a wiretap on those specific neurons.
Exactly. It intercepts that chemical voice, turns it into the binary ones and zeros that a computer understands, and bypasses the broken body entirely. They used deep learning networks to decode those signals and synthesize real-time speech.
That is incredible, but again, that is therapy.
But wait, we are moving beyond even needing to open the skull to do this. Consider the Stentrode device. Instead of drilling a hole in the skull, which is highly invasive and carries huge infection risks, they realized they could use the body's natural plumbing.
Oh, the jugular vein approach.
Yes, they thread a tiny mesh stent up through the jugular vein in the neck, right into the blood vessel sitting directly over the motor cortex.
So it reads the brain waves right through the wall of the vein.
Right. And it allowed patients with ALS to wirelessly send text messages and do online banking simply by thinking about moving their limbs. These are the first empirical steps in an evolutionary leap away from a biology that is, frankly, incredibly fragile. We are finally fulfilling that 1957 vision from biologist Julian Huxley, where the human species transcends itself in its entirety.
Okay, I come at it from a very different way. While reading brain waves through a vein to help an ALS patient text their family is a triumph of modern medicine, crossing the threshold from therapy into radical enhancement is a catastrophic risk.
Catastrophic?
Yes, to our identity. I look at this through a bioconservative lens. Environmental ethicist Bill McKibben has argued powerfully that our universal human limitations, like our vulnerability, our finite physical constraints, our mortality, they are not just design flaws to be engineered away.
Wait, so you think suffering is a feature, not a bug?
I think limitations provide the necessary context for the experience of meaningful human choice. If you remove all biological constraints, human life ceases to be recognizable, let alone meaningful.
I just fundamentally disagree that fragility equals meaning.
But practically speaking, we face the terrifying prospect of a genetic divide. Unbridled technological enhancement naturally bifurcates society into two distinct species, a hyper-enhanced wealthy elite and a purely biological underclass. If you follow this trajectory, you are laying the groundwork for human, post-human caste warfare.
You talk about a divide, but you are assuming there is a clean break between fixing a deficit and enhancing a baseline.
There is a break.
Historically and technically, that line is a complete illusion. BCIs initially developed for therapy naturally and inevitably paved the way for human enhancement. It is the exact same underlying mechanism.
I don't agree that therapy and enhancement are mechanically the same. One restores a human baseline and the other attempts to exceed it.
But the computer doesn't know the difference. Think of a neuron firing as an analog wave. A BCI is just a universal translator converting that wave to digital data. Let's look at William Dobell's work back in the 1970s.
With the artificial vision?
Right. He implanted a single-array BCI onto the visual cortex of a man who was blinded in adulthood. By stimulating the brain directly, he produced phosphenes, the sensation of seeing flashes of light. That is pure therapy. It is bypassing a broken eye.
Exactly. Therapy.
But fast forward to 2002 with Kevin Warwick.
Ah, the cybernetics researcher who implanted himself.
Yes, he had a 100-electrode array fired directly into the median nerve of his arm. He used it to control a robotic hand, which is essentially therapeutic tech, but then he went further. He hooked the array up to ultrasonic sensors.
Wait, so he was experiencing spatial distance like a bat?
Precisely. His brain's neuroplasticity allowed him to assimilate those electrical pulses not as random shocks, but as a completely new, extra-human sense.
Wow.
He could navigate a room blindfolded by feeling the distance to objects. He even conducted the first direct electronic communication with his nervous system and his wife's, who also got an implant. That is pure enhancement.
Right.
But the biological mechanism, reading and writing action potentials, is identical to Dobell's therapy. I look at this like the printing press. The printing press offloaded human memory to physical books. BCIs are just the next step in externalizing our cognition.
But wait, when you compare a neural array to a printing press, you are missing a massive psychological boundary. When I put a book down, I maintain my autonomous self. I am still me.
You are still you with the BCI?
Are you? When you hardwire the internet into my frontal lobe, the me becomes entirely subjective.
How so? You are still the one choosing to process that information.
But when you cross into radical neural enhancement, you fundamentally objectify the human body. You begin treating the human mind as hardware to be hot-swapped. We have to look back to Noboru Koizawa's 1960 Metabolist Manifesto.
The architectural movement?
Yes, but he warned of a future where everyone has a brainwave receiver conveying exactly what people are thinking and feeling in real time. He recognized that under those conditions, individual consciousness dissolves entirely into the will of mankind as a whole. We lose the private autonomous self.
I think Koizawa was vastly underestimating the brain's ability to maintain a sense of self while processing new inputs.
It is not just about processing inputs, it is about external control. Philosopher Jürgen Habermas argues that true moral autonomy depends on not being subject to unilaterally imposed specifications.
Meaning what?
Meaning when you alter the fundamental biology of a human being to meet external efficiency metrics, when you upgrade your nervous system because society demands fast reaction times, you are turning a subject into an object.
I understand the fear of losing the private self, but you are assuming that enhancement automatically equates to a loss of autonomy, rather than a massive expansion of it.
How is it an expansion?
A person who chooses to integrate an electrode array to interface with a computer is exercising morphological freedom. That is the fundamental civil liberty to modify one's own body.
But if I choose to give myself an ultrasonic sense, I am not dissolving my consciousness. I am extending my agency into new realms of experience. You talk about morphological freedom, but freedom isn't free. Agency doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within a ruthless economic and social reality. If these arrays cost millions to implant and maintain, Agency becomes a luxury good.
I acknowledge the risk of unequal access. That is a genuine concern.
A massive concern.
But banning these technologies is precisely the wrong approach. Prohibition just drives the technology underground, ensuring that only the ultra-wealthy have access through black markets or offshore clinics.
So how do you prevent the genetic divide then?
Through public policy. We look to the democratic transhumanist model proposed by bioethicist James Hughes. He argues that techno-progressives must actively implement policies like universal healthcare vouchers, specifically for human enhancement technologies.
Vouchers? Seriously?
Yes. If we structure society to ensure equal access, we neutralize the threat of a biological caste system. We make the upgrades available to everyone.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. The idea that progressive tax policies or healthcare vouchers can neatly contain the impact of radical neurological enhancement is incredibly naive.
Why? We subsidize all kinds of medical interventions today.
Because we can't even ensure equal access to basic dental care or clean water globally right now. And you are suggesting we will equitably distribute highly invasive, digitally connected, surgically implanted neuroprosthetics?
It's a goal we have to work toward.
Klaus-Gard Giesen points out that transhumanism isn't actually a liberation movement. It is the tragic consequence of atomized individualism. It is the ultimate commodification of the body within consumer culture.
So you think it reduces the brain to a subscription model?
Exactly. What happens when the company that manufactures your neural firmware goes bankrupt? Do you lose your eyesight? Do you lose your memories?
Well,
And look at where the funding for this technology originates. It isn't coming from philanthropic organizations trying to expand human enlightenment. DARPA's BRAIN initiative has been a major driver of BCI technology.
true, but
The military is actively researching how to stretch human combat capacity to 168 sleepless hours using neurological interventions. This technology is inherently driven by power and state control.
the military funded the early internet too. And now it is the greatest democratizing force for information in human history.
But the internet doesn't live inside your skull. If we allow this to proceed, the people who get the best enhancements won't be the most virtuous. They will be the most wealthy and the most militarized.
That's a pretty pessimistic view.
And even if you could distribute these devices equally with your vouchers, you are still subjecting the entire population to biological coercion.
Coercion? If it's a choice, how is it coercive?
Because the market forces your hand. If your coworker gets a Neuralink that allows them to interface with an AI and do a week's worth of cognitive labor in an hour, you have to get one too just to remain employable.
Well,
It ceases to be a choice. You are forced to undergo neurosurgery just to survive in a hyper-competitive economy.
look, I hear the dystopian framing, but it assumes the alternative, meaning remaining purely biological, is somehow safe or stable. And that brings us to the crux of why the transhumanist imperative is so urgent. Remaining purely biological is actually the greatest existential risk humanity faces.
Wait, how is staying human a risk?
Because of our current trajectory, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. The physicist Stephen Hawking made a brilliant point about this.
About AI?
He asserted that without mechanical enhancement to boost human intelligence and manage our inherent biological aggression, our civilization may simply be too stupid collectively to survive the weapons we've created. We are an incredibly unstable system.
Okay.
Biological evolution is just too slow to keep up with technological evolution.
So your solution to the threat of godlike technology is to physically fuse our brains with it.
Yes, because of I.J. Good's concepts of the intelligence explosion, the technological singularity. If we create artificial superintelligence, and we are racing toward that right now, we must integrate with machines to keep pace.
That's quite a leap.
If we remain isolated, unenhanced biological apes, we will be completely left behind or destroyed by our own creations. Integrating our neural networks with artificial systems isn't just a fun consumer lifestyle choice, and it's not just about staying competitive at an office job. It is an evolutionary necessity for our species' survival.
That is a fascinating framing, but I believe it fundamentally misdiagnoses the root of our problems. You are arguing that the pursuit of ultra-intelligent machines and radical human enhancement is the solution.
It is.
But those exact pursuits are creating the existential risks you claim to be solving.
You think transhumanism creates the risk?
Entirely. Philosopher Mary Midgley offers a devastating critique of this exact mindset. She argues that these transhumanist ambitions are essentially pseudoscientific power fantasies.
Power fantasy.
Yes, they are driven by an irrational fear of death and a deep, fundamental discomfort with the material human body. You are trying to solve human fallibility by abandoning humanity altogether.
It is not abandoning humanity. It is elevating it. We're using our human intelligence to escape our biological frailties.
But look at the sheer physical danger of the technologies being proposed to achieve this. We aren't just talking about a pacemaker. We are talking about concepts like neural dust.
Right. Millimeter-sized, wirelessly powered nerve sensors,
Yes, scattered deep within the brain tissue.
which would eliminate the need for traditional surgeries. It is an elegant solution.
It is a systemic nightmare. What happens when millions of microscopic nodes inside your cortex are hacked? What happens during a localized EMP or a simple software glitch?
We build safeguards.
The potential for catastrophic misuse by bad actors is immense. By trying to mechanize the mind, you are introducing a million new vectors for our extinction. Instead of chasing these techno-utopian escape hatches, we should focus on secular resilience.
Meaning what exactly? Just accepting our limits?
Yes, meaning environmental stewardship, international peace building, and strengthening our social communities. We don't need to alter the fundamental fabric of human biology to survive the future. We need the moral fortitude to live within our natural limits.
But those natural limits are exactly what cause our suffering. The bioconservative approach is essentially asking us to accept disease, cognitive decline, and eventual extinction with dignity, rather than fighting against it with every tool at our disposal.
That's a mischaracterization.
Is it? When a stroke damages the paralesional cortex and a person is locked inside their own body, unable to blink, environmental stewardship doesn't give them their voice back. A brain-computer interface does.
I have never denied the value of restoring a baseline. But you want to scale that up to change what a human is.
Because as the technology scales from treating a stroke to expanding the bandwidth of human communication, it elevates our capacity for empathy.
Empathy?
Imagine being able to share a raw emotion or a complex thought directly, brain to brain, with the clumsy bottleneck of spoken language. It would revolutionize human understanding.
Empathy doesn't come from shared data bandwidth. It comes from shared vulnerability.
I don't see it that way.
If we engineer away our vulnerabilities, if we turn our minds into closed-loop digital networks, we engineer away the very things that can connect us to one another.
Well, as we step back and look at the landscape we've covered today, it is incredibly clear that we are looking at the exact same technological horizon, but seeing two vastly different futures.
Very different.
From my perspective, neurotechnologies like BCIs are essential tools for directed evolution. They aren't just medical devices. They are our best hope for alleviating immense biological suffering, expanding our cognitive horizons, and ensuring humanity's long-term survival in an increasingly complex universe.
And from my perspective, that same unbridled pursuit of human enhancement threatens the very foundations of our society. It risks destroying our moral autonomy by objectifying the mind. It threatens to create insurmountable socioeconomic inequality through a genetic divide, and it fundamentally risks erasing the definition of what it means to be human in favor of a mechanized, commodified existence.
Despite this deep philosophical divide, we absolutely converge on one undeniable reality. This technology is not slowing down.
No, it really isn't.
It is advancing at an exponential rate. We are moving from non-invasive EEG headsets reading broad sensoriomotor oscillations to highly invasive intracortical microelectrode arrays recording the spikes of individual neurons. This is no longer the realm of science fiction.
Agreed. The pace of development from early DARPA grants to active clinical trials in paralyzed patients today means we must have these conversations right now. The decisions we make in the next decade will echo for centuries.
Absolutely.
But we will continue to deeply disagree on whether this technological trajectory will ultimately liberate humanity from its biological chains or fracture it into disparate, unequal castes.
Which is precisely why intellectual charity and rigorous debate are so necessary when navigating the future of human biology. We invite you to dive deeper into the source material.
Yes, explore the clinical trials, read the philosophical manifestos from both the transhumanists and the bioconservatives.
Inform your own conclusions about exactly where the line should be drawn.
Because once we cross that boundary, once we fundamentally alter our own neurobiology, it may be biologically and socially impossible to return.
Indeed. We started today by talking about the physical boundary between a human and a tool, like the hand and the hammer. As brain-computer interfaces weave deeper into the neural fabric of our minds, that boundary is dissolving before our eyes. The tool is no longer something we hold.
No, it's not.
The question we leave you with is this: when the tool becomes you, who is holding whom?